Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Simon Says Stamp. Today I'm going to be using some stamp sets from Sugar Pea Designs, and it's the striped background and the What's Poppin' stamp set. I'm going to be using two different kinds of masking tape, and that's important. So the first one's going to be Post-it tape, and this, I think mine is like 3 inches, so I just cut them down. I'm sorry, I think it's 1.5 inches. I just cut them down to a 1/2 inch to give myself a border around my card. I wanted to do a stamped background and I wanted there to be a border, but I also wanted to do some distress inking. So I'm just going to fold those over on the side, and then I'm going to stamp and mask the girl from the stamp set in the center of my card. I thought she was totally adorable. And I knew I wanted to color her, and I've had this stamp set for quite some time now and just have not had a chance to get to it. So many unloved stamps. So I'm going to stamp that down. I'm using Intense Black ink from Simon Says Stamp because it's Copic safe, and I am going to Copic color her. So now her mask is cut with Eclipse masking paper. Why am I making the distinction? Well, when it comes to the stamping, it's going to be important. So I'm going to use some Distress Oxide ink in Worn Lipstick, and I'm only going to add ink to the right hand side. Like, I'm concentrating it in the bottom right hand side. I did go all the way up the right hand side and all the way over on the bottom, but I kind of faded it off and really just left it the darkest pigment in that bottom right hand corner. So now I'm going to use the straight background, all of my masking still in place, and I'm going to stamp in the same thing. Now, traditional distress ink, you could stamp with it. It was just not a very good result. It just wasn't. These, because they are mixed with pigment ink, do give a good result. Well, or so I've heard. Now that I've done it, I can tell you they do give a good result. And it was pretty solid stamping. However, I was not a solid stamper. Because as you can see, when I lift this up, I missed like this whole section where I didn't push down hard enough. So I'm like, okay, no problem. I'll just re-ink this thing up to make sure I get, really good coverage, and then I will Sherry Carol CPR it. I like stood up it from my chair. I pushed super hard. And it really did give a very good impression. I had one small spot on the left-hand side where I just didn't push down hard enough, so I just relined it back up, and then I didn't even need to re-ink. I just pushed down that spot that still had ink on it, and I was happy with the result. Now, with the Post-it tape on the outside, the ink sat on top of it, so it was still really wet, especially since I stamped twice. And so basically I had to go in with a paper towel and like buff it till it was dry so that I could pick up the masking tape without getting ink all over my fingers, and you've been there, all over my card. So that's the way I kind of approached it. Now, on the flip side of that, with the Eclipse masking paper, it did not sit on top of it. I didn't have to worry about buffing it off, but it did seep through in some areas. I'm like, I can't win. So it wasn't anything that was totally terrible. It was just a couple of little pink spots. Basically, I gave her chicken pox. I mean, that's pretty much what it looked like. Just all over her body and her popcorn bowl. And you can see that here now that we're the masking's removed and we're zoomed in. But I'm like 20 minutes in at this point. I'm committed. So we're just going to roll with it. So I'm going to do my typical go-to skin combination. Here's why. Okay, so not that I didn't think their stamps were adorable. I totally did think their stamps were adorable, and I have worked with Sugar Pea stamps before. However, when I went to Simon Says Create, they were my neighbors. So you saw, I think it was last week or the week before, Ink Block Shop was my neighbor on the left-hand side, while Sugar Pea Designs was my neighbor on the right-hand side. And basically, Wendy and her husband, Eddie, were there. They were wonderful people. They were so nice. We got along super well. And her husband basically saved my life. I mean, he didn't, jump in front of a bus or anything to save my life, though he seems like totally like the kind of guy who would. But you know what he did do? He brought me coffee. God love the man. He was totally amazing because we got up so early. I mean, just so so early. And by the time, like, we've sat there for, I mean, just hours. So what time did it start? It started like 8. I'm not even telling you anything about the shading. I feel like I've shaded this a ton before. So if this is the first time you're watching one of my videos, I apologize. Back to the story, which is clearly far more entertaining than my coloring. So we would get there at 8, and then we didn't get a break until like 1. Well, let me tell you, I've gone through my coffee. The coffee is gone through. And Wendy was doing the creative tickets for Sugar Pea Designs. So she was smart, and she brought her husband. And so I was sitting there talking about coffee, and she was like, oh, do you need coffee? He's going to go get me coffee. He'll bring you coffee. He totally, not only did he bring me coffee, he remembered the cream and sugar. He was just like a rock star, and she was so awesome to let me just like borrow her hubby to get my coffee. They were such nice people. And then after Create, we got to hang out, and there's just super cool and tons of fun. So when I came back, I was like, there's a stamp set, or there's a stamp company that I want to support, absolutely. So then I bought up some stuff because it's adorable, and I loved the people, which for me is like winning combo. So back to this coloring. I gave her the pox. I told you. I gave her the chicken pox with my stamping. So what I decided to do to kind of cover that up is give her freckles. I personally, if I step out into the sunlight in the summer, my face becomes one large freckle because I do have some Irish in me. Eventually I will tan, thank God. I'm not like some people who just, they never get a tan and they always burn, and I feel so bad for them because they just look miserable all summer long. But what I did was I gave her some little dots with the E11 and then again with the E04, and then I blended them out with the E50. So now we're moving on to her hair, and I'll actually talk about what I'm doing and not people that I met. Though I really am like forever grateful for the coffee the man brought me. So here I picked the E50s. I knew for the most part that the only part of the pox I wasn't going to be able to cover up was going to be on her face. So I didn't go too terribly light with her hair. I went kind of more like a honey blonde. But it was enough. It was certainly enough to cover up the little teeny tiny dots of pink. So when I'm doing hair, typically I like to start at the roots where the part is, and that's where I'm going to add the majority of my shading. Anywhere that it's round, so on the right side of her head here, it's rounding out over her head, there would be a highlight. Anywhere the strands are round, you would have a highlight where it's rounded out. So on the left is a much better example where her hair curls up. It would be darker on the ends, it would be darker from the base, but that part where it's actually round would be lighter. There would be a highlight there. So when I do hair, I'm using very light flicking motions and just the tip of my marker. You don't want to create what I call like a wall of color. You want your strands you're flicking to vary, because in real life your hair is not one solid color. It's a bunch of intermingled colors, and that's what gives you highlights and lowlights that God has naturally given all of us in our hair color. You'll notice that I am concentrating a lot of my shading on the hair that is coming out from behind her neck, and the hair on the right hand side is slightly darker because that one is tucked behind her ear, where on the left hand side it's kind of overlapping her ear. So the part that portion of her hair behind her ear would be darker. The E57 isn't necessarily my darkest color, but it is the darkest one that I'm going to be adding a lot of. So I'm trying to give myself some dimension, concentrating those areas that fall behind objects like her ear, the little popcorns, adding some shading there. I am going to use the E59, but I'm really using it very sparingly. I'm going to be using it where the bow is attached to her hair, because you have an object sitting on top of another object, so that would be darker. Also, her hair would be gathered where the bow is, out from behind her neck, and then again behind her ear and behind that little popcorn bucket. So I'm not adding a ton of this darker color, just enough to give me some good contrast. And then I'll go back in from the E57 and work my way back out to my lightest color. I'm trying not to be terribly heavy-handed with the darks. Sometimes that happens to me. But the E55 is really going to be my main color. And I will start adding quite a bit more of it at this point. I am not sweeping on the color so that it is completely saturated. I'm still using the flicking motions. I'm still trying to conserve that highlight. And this is, again, just to create that look of strands, the highlights and lowlights that we naturally have in our hair. I'll go over it with the E53 to just blend out all of the rest of the hair. And then just one time with the E50, really only where it's the highlights would be. When you put a lighter color over a darker color with a Copic, it does lift some of the color. So I don't want to lift the darker colors that sit behind. I want those to stay dark and contrast. So when I picked the background color, I really liked the worn lipstick. Originally I wanted to, I think we all have a natural inclination with the popcorn, because the buckets are usually red and white, to go red and white. And I didn't want the background to be so in your face. I wanted the girl to stand out. So I was a little nervous about bringing the red into the bucket, but that R32, which is like the base color for my red, is a dead match for that worn lipstick. I also used it to fill in any areas around my masking, so around my girl, where maybe I didn't get color right up against her. I just filled that in with the R32, and you can't even tell. So if you're using this color in the future, this worn lipstick, that R32, total match, and will save any kind of thing that was missing. Had I known that it was such a close match, I probably would not have stamped the background a third time and maybe saved myself the little chickenpox incident, because I would have just filled it in with my marker. But nonetheless, shading for the bucket, I'm shading from the top and the bottom, also where her little arm and hand are clasping it. I'm adding shading underneath those as well. So I did the red and then I'm doing the white. Really, you should do the white first and then the red, because the lighter colors of the grays can pick up the red and drag it. I don't really know what I was doing there. So don't do as I say, not as I do. Isn't that a parent motto? Yeah, do that. So for the popcorn, and please excuse my hand just bobbing all over the place there. Typically when I'm showing you my colors, that's my opportunity to drink my coffee, which, as the story has established, you already know how important that is to me. I mean, coffee is life. So for the popcorn, I picked some brighter colors for my highlights, but then I'm going to move more towards more desaturated colors to get some depth. So I'm using the Y21, and then for the darkest shading, I'm going to switch over to a YR23. And I am adding shading to the popcorn that's behind other popcorn, but I'm also adding just kind of little V's in the middle of some of the other popcorns just to give it some dimension. For the tub part, I'm just shading up from the bottom over that word popcorn so that there would be more than one thing that was yellow in here. And then I'm just going to blend back out to my lightest color. The actual popcorn ended up being the Y11, Y21, and YR23. This sign, the popcorn sign, is the only part that ended up having any Y000 left on top of it. I'm going to use those same gray markers that I used for the, bucket, to do her little shoes. And for this, I wanted them to appear black, but I wanted there to be a highlight on them so that they would look like shiny black shoes. So I'm adding shading kind of around the edges. The C5 wasn't dark enough to make it look black, so I'm going to go ahead and bring in a C7. And I'm going to add that just to the left-hand side of her shoes so that the highlight will be on the right-hand side. There isn't a right or a wrong way to do this. You can do a center highlight. You can do the highlight on the left-hand side. I just typically tend to color as if my light source is in the top right, which puts my highlights on the right-hand side of my images. So I did her straps, and at first I did not add any of that C7, but then it didn't look right. So I did go back in and add the C7 and then just blended it out real quick with the C5. I went back and forth about what I was going to color her dress. I was like, I really like the pink. I think that the pink would look cute with some yellow green, but then there's red in here, and I don't want it to look Christmas. And I know it's not going to look Christmas, like rationally, but in my head, a red and green are just Christmas, period. I can't. It's like a roadblock in my mind that I cannot get past. So then I thought about doing like a traditional blue, and then I was all like patriotic. So what I ended up going with was these blue greens. And I don't know why I didn't just go to the blue greens in the first place, because I love red with blue green. I don't know why it took me so long to get there. But anyway, I am adding shading underneath the bucket she is holding, around the edges of her skirt. She does have just a little sliver of sleeve that it sticks out that would also be shaded. And even though I added every color to it, at the end of the day, the only one you could see are the two darkest. So maybe save yourself some time and just do that. For her bow, I again left the highlight just like I did on the shoes. So the highlight's going to be on the right hand side. I'm adding shading to the edges. For the little tails and the underneath of the bow, I filled those in completely with the lightest color because they would be darkest. They're going to be dark areas. So again, just going through, careful to conserve that white highlight on her bow so that it does end up having some dimension. I'm adding more shading toward the center where the bows are coming out from the folds, but not necessarily directly to the center of the bow. There is not a lot of area to color here, and I want to make sure that I'm conserving that highlight, but also still having enough room to add in my contrasting colors, because that's really what's going to give me any kind of dimension here. For the underneath, like where the bow is folded over, and for the tails, I almost completely filled it in with that BG13 and then just left a teeny tiny bit with the BG11. For her stockings, I'm doing a center highlight because her leg is a rounder object. In order to ensure that I'm able to keep that highlight, I actually filled it in with my lightest color and then I switched back to my darkest color. And I'm just going to add the darkest color on the edges to give her legs that center highlight, because I want them to look round. This doesn't necessarily match the rest of my shading perfectly, but I think it's okay. Here I grabbed the wrong marker. Yeah, love when that happens. So I grabbed a BG15 instead of a BG11. Thank God and hallelujah, the Copics are transparent and lighter colors will pick up darker colors, because I could just go in with the BG11 and rub it kind of right in the center, and it did pick up some of that color and it doesn't look awkward. For the rest of the stripes on her little leggings, I am making them white, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm adding the pigment out on the edges, leaving the white part in the center. And then that's pretty much it for the actual image. She is floating in the middle of this background right now, so I wanted to give her a little bit of ground to stand on. I'm using the same cool grays that I've been using for the entire card, and I would love to tell you that I did it on purpose. Her shadow ended up being a little bit bigger to the left-hand side, so it looks like the right source is coming from the right-hand side, which is convenient since that's how I colored it, but really, I just didn't color proportionately. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment. I really loved this because if you frequent my blog, you know I often say at the bottom, thanks for popping by. So I thought that this was pretty on point for me. And what do they have? They have like, I miss you, thank you, hello. So it's got a ton of really good sentiments in there. And then I'm going to add some white highlights I did it to her bow, to the popcorn. I'm going to give her little dress some polka dots because I can never leave well enough alone on a one layer card. I don't think they detract anything from it. I think that they look cute, but you know, you don't have to add them. It's certainly a personal preference thing. I also added the highlights to her little black shoes. I prefer a bold outline, so I'm going to go ahead and outline my whole image with the EK Success writing pen. The only thing that I did not outline was the word popcorn. I was too nervous about messing it up. In order to accent the sentiment, I'm going to use some clear sequins in 2 different sizes. These are from Pretty Pink Posh. And then in order to make sure that they don't go anywhere, I'm just adding 1 little drop of glossy accents in each sequin. I'm going to use some clear Wink of Stella on a lot of it. Yeah, pretty much everything, because I love the shimmer. So all the green parts and the yellow parts. And then that's the whole card. So pretty clean and simple. It'll be super easy to mail because it's flat except for those sequins. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye.